Thank you. The commission noted, and 50 years ago, that juveniles were the #1 place that we could make a difference with crime, and I think that that stays the same now. In fact, they're the most promising target for dealing with crime, and so yet the problems that were noted in that time are still remain. Specifically, I would hope that the commission would find out ways to deal with the hurdles, figure out what those are, figure out how we overcome them after 50 years, and focus on ways to get the money to do so. I discussed both the parts of the commission report that dealt with what the causes of juvenile crime were, as well as what our responses should be in the paper. Today, I'm going to talk more about what policymakers and practitioners can do, given the context of our talks today. The National Research Council can provide the framework for what we're going to do, and that is they came up a few years ago with 7 hallmarks of juvenile justice reform that can guide all efforts to reform the system. And these include issues such as accountability without criminalization, alternatives to justice involvement, focusing on public safety in confinement only when that's necessary for public safety, a genuine commitment to fairness, family engagement, paying attention to disparate treatment for folks who are minorities especially, and giving individualized response for needs and risks. Now I want to talk a little bit about, if I were a practitioner and policymaker, what I think the key issues that we have learned over the 50 years in research. The first, I think, which can be an overarching theme, is to help, not hurt. That is, that therapeutic interventions have been found to be the most important efforts that we can put forth to affect juvenile crime. We know that the punishing ones actually can do harm, and that is something that is important to remember, is that harm is one of the options for what we do. We don't always, just because we do it, make a good difference. Sometimes we can make a bad one. And to limit the reach into juvenile and family lives whenever we possibly can. The next is to provide better procedural protections for kids. The commission said many years ago to do this. We still struggle a lot with how we get this done. And although there are policies out there that say that we are giving these things to kids, on the street it's really hard to get this done. And that's one of the things we really struggle with. So one of the ways we could do that is update the JJDPA, which hasn't been updated for 15 years. It has been introduced a number of times, but not fixed, so to speak, updated with what we know now. But there are a number of other issues that kids are struggling with in the community that we still need to solve. And one of those is overrepresentation of African Americans in the system, police interactions, especially in poor minority neighborhoods. Interrogations are not ideal for kids, and Barry Feld has recommended that we record all of them so we know what happens to the kids in these situations, and make them less confrontational so that they're kids, right? So we're not terrorizing them, so to speak. To make sure that intake process is fair, and when we bring them into the system, we don't know a whole lot about what happens to kids when they're in intake. Also, to provide competency evaluations to make sure kids understand what's happening to them. And Feld argues that we should have them automatically for everyone under 14, but certainly something that people should consider. And to have free, mandatory, non-waivable counsel, because a lot of families waive it thinking they can't pay for it, when in fact the kids probably need it more than adults. Also, to use adult sentencing sparingly, only when we really need it. And one idea is to use youth as a mitigating factor rather than an aggravating factor when a kid is sent to adult court, as well as to ensure that sentences aren't very long if they go to adult system. Additionally, I think we need to continue to build, implement, and refine cost-effective, evidence-based programs, just as Cynthia was mentioning, for at-risk and adult and justice-involved juveniles. The federal government can fund it. There are lots of options out there in terms of helping practitioners figure out how to implement it, and in terms of other sources for best practices. We have a lot of information now. We have to get that out there more. And these are big issues, but really these are all related to poverty. And so if we could tackle the issues related to poverty, that would be really useful. There's research now that shows that toxic stress in childhood changes the brain and has long-term outcomes that for kids and for our communities, truthfully. So If we could do things to concentrate programming in disadvantaged areas, clean up disorder, make public areas safer, build networks in these communities so that parents have support and kids have mentors, improve problems related to child abuse and lack of prenatal care, and help with schools. There are lots of issues related to schools. The educational research is shown many issues that are related, including not even having good books, parental interaction. There are so many things that we could do to improve schools. And now I want to take us just a little step back and say that one of the things I think that's key to making these things work is we have to better our own work and be self-reflective. And what I mean by that is that practitioners, policymakers, researchers, we all really need to work as a team, and that means to understand and listen and communicate with each other. Not just say you do this part and I do that part, but rather understand the constraints and needs of each other, others' positions, of our agencies, of our situations, so that we can actually make progress instead of sort of be stymied by the fact that we have collaboration concerns. Another issue that is related to sort of how we work is building better data systems. A number of scholars have argued that we need a database to track implementation and results of evidence-based programming, one big database so that people who are doing it can find that. I understand this is big. Improved data on juvenile justice processing, which of course we're working on. We have the Juvenile Justice Model Data Project, but after 50 years, we still don't have a national system where we can see what's going on with kids. And also, I would hope that we have a number of efforts that are to get information from kids, especially in schools. But truthfully, the juvenile system deals with kids who aren't in schools. And if we could find a way to expand those efforts, even something like the Census of Juveniles in Residential Placement, if there could be a self-report part to that somehow that is anonymous so the kids aren't reporting to find out about their self-reports of crimes, victimizations, experiences, we could tag on to that. That'd be really useful. And finally, I think a key issue is that we really need to remember to invest in children, to provide adequate resources, because if we don't do that, we can't make a difference. Thank you.